academic journals, including Applied Linguistics Review, Assessing Writing, Assessment in Education, Educational Research, International Journal of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism, International Journal of Listening, Language Assessment Quarterly, Language Testing, and also Reading and Writing. So he is incredibly productive, as you can see. His talk today is entitled Integrated Language Assessment in a Digital Age, Some Fundamental Considerations in Task Design and Validation. Guoxing, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chris. I'm Guoxing from University of Bristol. Thank you very much for your participation. I kind of prepared the beginning as whether you're listening to the talk live or watching the recording at British Council New Directions website. So that's a kind of a preamble for the future. So thank you very much for your participation. And I would also like to thank British Council for your invitation. The title of my talk today is Integrated Language Assessment in a Digital Age, Some Fundamental Considerations in Task Design and Validation. To some extent, this talk is an extension of what I presented earlier at the two pre-conference symposium, one on eye tracking research and the other on the use of technology in language assessment, but perhaps with a more specific focus now on integrated language assessment. Integrated language assessment task has becoming increasingly very popular among major test providers and researchers, either as a field of research inquiry and a method of assessing language proficiency. The popularity may have been facilitated and enhanced by the use of technology in test delivery. In this talk, we will first of all review the current practices of integrated assessment in high-stakes language tests. For example, what do integrated language assessment tasks look like in English language tests? I will use summarization as an example because summarization is central to successful performance in any integrated writing speaking task. We'll also review the debate on the premises, promises, problems, and potential compromises we are making in using integrate tasks at different assessment contexts. And thirdly, I will highlight, I hope, the multi-dimensionality and the complexity of the constructs of integrated assessment tasks, and present the opportunities and challenges, or reflect on the opportunities and challenges in researching and validating such tasks in a digital age by asking several questions, I would say fundamental questions, to reflect on and critique the current research and the practice in integrated assessment. We will come back to these questions, so I will just read through these questions very quickly. For example, what can be counted as integrated assessment tasks? What are the differential impacts of features of source input, including visuals, audios, texts, graphs, paper-based versus computer-based or delivered on task performance? And what are the cognitive processes and the core skills involved in completing integrated assessment tasks? And what roles that technology can play in delivering and assessing these tasks and researching these tasks. What are the, and I said earlier, we want to develop a more kind of systematic approach to understand better the theoretical frameworks of integrated assessment. So very briefly, these questions. I said earlier, the influence of major English language tests has possibly, as a kind of the outcome of our current interest in research in integrated assessment. So, for example, the TOEFL IBT, definitely the introduction of the integrated tasks there somehow stimulated or revitalized our interest in integrated assessment. But integrated assessment itself is not a kind of a recent invention. For example, the old IELTS test in the 1990s definitely had the integrated assessment. It's was kind of a hallmark of IELTS. And also in a review by Cyril Well and colleagues, they say summary was to last as a task in CPE right through to 1975. Actually, it started probably in 1930s. So overall, and also in our review with my colleague Tony, we also look at the summary writing as a kind of a history. Definitely integrated writing is not a new invention. How do we define integrated assessment tasks? There are different terminologies and different ways of saying what it is. For example, writing from sources, source-based writing, content-responsible writing, reading to write, listening to write, discourse synthesis. But I would argue that all these tasks, what is central or fundamental is summarization. It's a process involved or a skill involved in any kind of integrated language assessment. And some of you may be also quite familiar with another term, integrative tests, which you can find in the Dictionary of Language Testing, 1999. It says integrative test means a test in which learners are required to combine various skills in answering test items, as opposed to discrete point test in which each item focuses on a single element of a language. There are different ways, obviously, to define integrated assessment tasks. Some are based on language skills, as we have seen the definition of integrative tasks. For example, listening to speak, listening, reading, writing. There are a number of definitions offered by colleagues here. Particularly, I would emphasize the third bullet point here, a task which requires students to produce written compositions that display appropriate and meaningful uses of and orientation to source evidence, both conceptually and textually. So now here, no skill is necessarily emphasized. And other colleagues also argue integrated assessment means integration of language and content. So like the CLIO type of assessment, which is very popular, particularly in the European continent, and integration of the use of technology, particularly for task completion purposes, as an integral part of the construct of language assessment, which leads to various questions on multimodality and authenticity of tasks. I will come back to it later as a kind of one of the focus of this conference as well as the talk. Okay? And also, as I said earlier, the integration of different modalities and sources. This is another way of defining integrated assessment. So we use different kinds of input, textual, audio, visual, and all sorts of other things. Okay? And also can be defined in terms of the output. So we may be listening to summarized videos in writing, or listening to simply orally summarize a video or a lecture, or graph-based writing task, and so on. Okay. Now, Alistair gave another definition here. He said, tasks that require learners or test takers to incorporate substantive content from source materials in print, audio, and or visual forms. The key word apparently is substantive content. So it depends on how much or the amount of information provided from the source, and so on. Recently, there's also a debate on whether integrated assessment is a linear process. As I said, I used arrows like a listening to something. But there's a kind of a question now about whether this should be reciprocal integration. So we have reading into writing, which is very commonly accepted term. But how about writing into reading? So in the sense you start to write and then come back to what you have read and read it again and start to write again. This kind of iterative process, whether the current integrated assessment tasks in high stakes tests actually are doing this or whether it's worth doing it. Now, here I'll give you a few examples of integrated assessment tasks in speaking and writing tests. I will focus more on writing, but in terms of integrated assessment itself, we could say that actually it should also involve other kind of productive skills, including obviously speaking. So we have IELTS writing task 1, TOEFL IBT, GPT is general English proficiency test in Taiwan, Pearson PTE academic, the Trinity integrated skills in English, Aiken Foundation and the Sophia University's test of English for academic purpose for university entrance, HKDSE, Hong Kong Diploma in Secondary Education, IGCSE ESL exams, for example, by Cambridge, assessment, Pearson, Oxford, and AQA. And also in China, the Gaokao summary writing and the new lingual skill business, the graph-based speaking tasks, the English test for international communication by Beijing Foreign Studies University use animated video as input for summarizing tasks. So these are just a kind of a list of some examples of integrated assessment tasks currently being offered in high stakes tests. Now, this is just a quick sort of a flip through. As you can see how the task would look like, that's the IELTS academic writing and the TOEFL IBT summarization. Task says, summarize the points made in the lecture you just heard, explaining how they cast a doubt on the points made in the reading, and your response will be judged on the basis of the quality of your writing and how well your response presents the points in the lecture and their relationship to the reading passage. And here is another example, the Cambridge IGCSE ESL as a kind of a two sets of the task. First of all, you make some short notes, and then imagine that you have given your talk to your class. Now your teacher asks you to follow this up with a summary for homework and so on. Here is a GPT example of summarization task. You're given the task to kind of summarize the two articles, but more importantly, you also need to make clear your own viewpoint on these main ideas and come to a conclusion, which is slightly different from other summarization tasks. And in GPT task, advanced writing task 2, you are given two graphs very similar to the IELTS task, but your job as the kind of a second bullet point says to make suggestions about what can be done to reduce, for example, in this case, the number of accidents in the downtown area. And in the PTE, there are three typical examples of summarization. Summarize written text of up to 300 words into a single 4-sentence, up to 75 words. Summarize a spoken text, retell a lecture, and so on. We'll come back to these tasks later. So this is on their screen, you can see is a short paragraph, and you're asked to summarize it in using one sentence only. Okay. And the Japanese TEEP test looks like this. You have two graphs, two short texts, and all on the same topic. You are asked to write a letter or something like that to express your views. And the Trinity involves information from text. Text could be written, could be nonverbal. And I mentioned the ETIC test, English test for international communication. For example, in the speaking test, we are writing up a report on how the use of animated video inputs for the summarization tasks. So basically, the test takers have to listen to the discussions or the negotiation between two speakers, and then play a role of one speaker to summarize what they have agreed and disagreed, and then offer a solution to their disagreement. In this case, as you can see, it's an eye tracking study. The disagreement is on the price, so it's the price negotiation. And also in ETIC test, in writing very similar to the IELTS academic writing task 1, and in speaking, as I said earlier, like what happened in the negotiation. And in Zhejiang province in China, where I'm from, they also use summary writing in alternative years, maybe, to assess the students' writing ability. So 350 words to be summarized into 60. For those who can read Chinese, you can read it. But the essence is that 300 words to be summarized into 60 words. And very popularly, the China Standards of English Language Ability, that document, the official document, has mentioned summarization skills or tasks at different levels, 1 to 9, using different terms in Chinese. 概括、归纳、整合、摘要、概要. For those who can't understand Chinese, all these words simply means more or less the same thing as summarization. Now, I think it has probably been mentioned nearly 100 times in this document about how important summarization skills is. Next, I will talk about apparently summarization and integrated writing tasks have become very popular. This is a kind of phenomenon now. And Alistair has summarized 5 promises of integrated writing tasks. Specifically, he highlighted these tasks in 3 key areas. For example, construct validity, test method effects, and test score use. In terms of the construct of integrated assessment, he argued that integrated assessment tasks mirror academic literacy activities and reflect well the construction, integration of multi-literacy models. And therefore, the tasks are more authentic and sufficiently challenging. And in terms of test methods, integrated assessment tasks are responsible to specific content and therefore can counter or reduce test method or practice effects, often associated with conventional item types. In terms of use of test data, integrated assessment can provide valuable diagnostic information for instruction and self-assessment. Now, take summarization as an example, because summarization is central to successful performance in any integrated tasks. I would provide further evidence for the existing literature on the promises and the premises of summarization tasks. So very quickly, I flip through. For example, people argue that reading comprehension is a sine qua non for summarization. Summarization is natural entailment of reading comprehension. They're not necessarily automatically. Summarization requires the comprehension, evaluation, condensation, and frequent transformation of ideas that have been presented. I should say that all these also apply to integrated assessment. And all these kind of promises is the hub of the wheel of reading comprehension. It's an essential communicative activity. It has natural appeal because they simulate real-world tasks in which non-native speakers, and I would argue native speakers as well, have to read and write a summary of the main ideas of the text. And summarizing tasks is a very common exercise in pedagogy and very popular in reading textbooks. It is a very active university students' life, and it's an essential skill for content acquisition and academic success. And whatever your interest is in studying a foreign language, there seems to be no escape from the acquisition and the development of summarization skills. And a test which requires test takers to summarize the propositional content in the reading passage will involve the full range of organizational characteristics. And the serial will also argues that reading into writing summary task types represent closely the cognitive processing and the knowledge-based requirements for real-life writing activities. I think that's enough to say the promises of integrated and summarization tasks. And corresponding to the 5 promises, Alistair also identified 5 perils of integrated assessment. The construct of integrated assessment needs to be better defined, and so does the rating criteria. And it's difficult to distinguish the language produced by test takers from the source materials. and there are potential confounding effects of one language ability over another. For example, reading comprehension of source materials affecting writing performance, the so-called muddied assessment. A threshold level of linguistic and cognitive abilities may be required to comprehend performance of integrated assessment tasks. Therefore, such tasks may not be suitable for certain groups of learners, and the test results may not be meaningfully comparable across different ability levels. Again, I would take summarization as an example and offer some reflections on the perils of summarization tasks from the perspectives of task instructions and assessment criteria. In many, if not all, of these summarization tasks I reviewed earlier, there seems to be an assumption that one type of summary or summarization exists. As you can see here, in the TOEFL IBT instructions, it simply asks the students to summarize, no other information whatsoever. In the PTE, it's the same thing. Read the passage below and summarize it in using one sentence and type your responses. Done. That's it. Simply ask you to summarize. And in the listen to summarize a short lecture, it's to write a summary for a fellow student who was not present at the lecture. This is slightly better, at least got a purpose. It's a summary for a fellow student. And in the IELTS test, similarly, it simply asks the student to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features. Again, no clear kind of a context of why I'm summarizing this information and for what purpose. And we know that summary is not a single entity. And there is a serious problem in much of this literature about summarization, as if there's an assumption that only one kind of summary exists. But we all know that there are different kinds of summary, sequential ones, synthesizing summaries, and so on. So I would argue, start to kind of make a plea now. First of all, we need to have a kind of a transparency in task directions and assessment criteria. We need to have a clear and transparent task directions to ensure that test takers know exactly what kind of summary it is they are expected to produce and what to include and not to include. We can't simply just tell them to summarize it or say, use the source text. And it's also imperative for item writers and teachers to take into account of various factors that may contribute to summarizing performance, which can include all sorts of different things like a text structure, topic interest, and then so on. I'm not going to kind of expand on that aspect. And summarization may well be a unique construct. It's different from independent writing. We need to probably, and I think it's important to say, to employ parameters or indicators which are different from and possibly additional to those for independent writings in order to better measure the quality of a summary in either the automated evaluation systems or other marking schemes for human raters, but which unfortunately is not really happening to the satisfaction of the students and to many researchers and even test providers. And I would argue that there is certainly a difference in terms of productive language. When I reviewed all these assessment criteria, they all mention about productive language, but the independent tasks and integrated writing tasks would require different kind of reproductive ability. There's a major concern about the copy paste or whether it's a creativity in writing. Now I would look at how the current research is doing. So we'll look at the current focuses and the trends of research on integrated assessment, which are kind of summarize them in a very sort of simple term. So we have research which compare the differences in students' performance between independent and integrated writing tasks or any other kind of assessment tasks, and the processes or strategies used by test takers during the integrated tasks, and studies which analyze the discourse features of written or spoken texts produced in the literal or critical summaries of source materials, looking at how the source have been used, and also the features of intertextuality between the source text and the written summaries, and also to look at the role of reading and writing proficiency of the test takers on their performance in integrated tasks. And also research on how we develop assessment criteria, raters and teachers' perceptions of integrated tasks, the diagnostic value of integrated assessment, and comparing the first language and the second language integrated tasks, their performance, and the cognitive processes involved. So these are some of the examples of our research we have been doing. For example, we compare the Chinese summarization versus the English summarization of the similar tasks in HKDSE, that's the Hong Kong context. And we looked at the test-taking processes in IELTS Academic Writing Task 1. Currently, we're doing the third project on that particular task. So starting from the Think Aloud to eye tracking research, the reports are available to download from IELTS.org website. And this is just a kind of follow-up from that research. We look at how students actually try to extract information from the graphs. And for those of you who are familiar with the Gulliver's Travel, we quoted this here, whether the exercise or whether the process is like extracting sunlight from cucumbers in a lab in Oxford University. So, and again, in this research, we emphasized the differences between word production and word reproduction. By production, we mean creating new words by the test takers. Reproduction, we mean the borrowing and extracting from the source materials, either from the task instructions or from the graphs. The central question is always to what extent what students produce is a production, is what they wrote, or is simply copy pasting, is a reproduction. Okay? We also look at the comparability between different types of integrated assessment tasks, for example, the GPD task versus the IELTS tasks. And the research on the TEEP tests, as I mentioned earlier, the 2 graphs and 2 short text are they different from other types of integrated tasks. This has also been mentioned about the use of animation video for summarization. It's an eye tracking study. And also very recently, this is actually a presentation in the symposium on eye tracking. Liu's my PhD student talked about how L2 learners actually process the automated feedback given by a kind of, here you can see the Write Improve system. So the students were asked to write on the IELTS Academic Writing Task 1, the graph-based writing task. And then they can upload their drafts multiple times, and the system will provide automatically generated feedback to students. We want to know to what extent the students actually use this information generated by the computer system. Again, it's an eye tracking study. And we also have done quite a lot of research on summarization, as you can see here, a number of publications on the use of summarization tasks from different sort of angles to look at the effects of presentation mode, computer familiarity, effects of the source text summarizability, the use of different language to summarize, and also the development of different evaluation criteria, whether we use students as expert or whether we use expert as expert. Okay? And very recently, we also reviewed Cyril Will's sort of views on integrated assessment tasks in a volume in memory of Cyril on the lessons and legacy, the tribute to Professor Cyril Will. Now, of all this effort we have been doing, clearly, I think we know better now about integrated language assessment, but there's still an urgent need to develop a more comprehensive and consistent theoretical framework to systematically research integrated language assessment. So through collective and coordinated efforts, we can reach better understanding of integrated assessment. By asking this very simple or basic questions as what, how, and why to assess language proficiency via integrated tasks and the potential impacts of integrated assessment on language education. But I think this, I should kind of declare this is by no means a conclusion of any kind or any sort. It's just a kind of reflection about how we might do better. So here we have, first of all, the conceptualizations of integrated assessment. What can be counted as integrated assessment tasks? What does integratedness really mean? And with what reference point do we define and operate integratedness and integrated assessment tasks with the support of computer technology? So this is for us to kind of reflect on the thing. In an editorial, or rather an epilogue of the special issue I edited for Language Assessment Quarterly, which was published in 2013, the title here is From Integrative to Integrated Language Assessment. I mentioned earlier the term integrative tests, which seems to cover or encompass a lot of kind of activities we are doing now, particularly in terms of integration of different language skills. But I would argue that integratedness is a lot more than simply integration of skills. As we have seen, it could be integration of different sources, different modalities of presentation, and also multiple ways of integrating and engaging different language skills. Okay, so I think the integratedness is open to different sort of interpretations and different ways to operationalize it in different tests, depending on how we want to kind of assess the students' ability in what kind of context and for what purposes. Now, in terms of the input, I would put this assessment in a very sort of a crude way of saying, here is the input, here is the filter plant, which I mean the person who is kind of processing all this information. And the third point is on the evaluation. How do we assess what we can assess or what the students present to us to be assessed? So in terms of the input sources, what are the differential impacts of the features of the source input, the visual, the audio, the text, the graphs, the paper-based or computer-based? And in terms of filter plant, what are the cognitive processes involved in completing integrated assessment tasks? What roles do test takers' characteristics, for example, their language, scientific skills, social educational background, training experience, and their interest in the source text, play a role in their performance? And in terms of evaluation, what would be the key indicators of success or failure of integrated assessment? Is it simply to count how many words are used, or whether the words are copied from the source text or not? And to what extent should evaluation criteria differ from those for independent tasks? And how do we design data-driven rating scale for integrated reading to a write scale? Unfortunately, I don't really have the time to expand on each of these questions, but I hope that this gives you a flavor of some of the challenges we are facing in assessing language proficiency using integrated assessment tasks. Now, what are the raters' reactions to integrate tasks and the rating scales, and how do raters make decisions based on the rating scales? And Sasina at Bedfordshire are also looking at how do we develop rubrics. But more important, I think that's the most important part of any research effort, is to how do we operationalize the multidimensionality of integrated tasks from different perspectives for different assessment purposes, users, test takers, and etc. And what are the practical issues of implementing integrated assessment in large-scale tests, both at the design stage, at administration stage, and evaluation stage? And in relation to teaching and the impact on learning. For example, to what extent are integrated tasks coachable or not coachable? A lot of people argue that they're not coachable, but may not be the case. Where is the kind of cut off or demarcation between desirable and unethical intensive coaching for these tasks? What are the impacts of integrated assessment on language education more generally? And what are the students' practices and abilities and even willingness for writing from the sources? Alistair did a survey with colleagues in Beijing and found very interesting stuff on, different abilities, different attitudes from university students. To what extent has CEFR has mentioned or reflected or incorporated integrated assessment through its mediation tasks? And to what extent does CSE, the China Standards of English, actually reflect and incorporate integrated assessment? What are the synergies between EAP writing research and the language testing research with regard to integrated assessment? Now, what can technology do to help us better design research and integrated assessment? As I said earlier, I do not have an answer or answers to all these questions. These are simply kind of questions for us to reflect on and look forward to the future. The global COVID-19 pandemic simply accelerated rapidly changes already in the progress in the use of technology in teaching, learning, and assessment. And the use of technology has now assumed apparently a much larger role in defining the construct of communication itself. For example, at the moment, I can't have an eye contact with you, but in a normal conference setting, I would be able to see whether someone is shaking head and did not agree with my kind of version of integrated assessment, or someone is smiling and kind of nodding, saying, yes, this is what we think important. But apparently, the computer technology is changing the way we deliver tests, we design the test, scoring and reporting test performance, and so on. And in Carol Chappell's, this is the slide I used earlier in the pre-conference symposium. Carol said there are three motivations or motives for using technology. One is efficiency-based, so cheaper and quicker, automated writing, speech evaluation, adaptive tests, and so on. Equivalence mode is to look at, whether computer-based tests can be delivered on paper, the same as a paper-based. But again, the paper-based is always a kind of a gold standard. And there's a little bit of real innovations, for example, using computers to do more delicate analysis of learner performance. And we know from the pre-conference symposiums on monitoring to ensure the security of the tests and so on, the home-based tests. And also use computer-generated feedback to learners. So there are some kind of potential mini transformations in horizon. But as Carol also asked at the video, say, are we really at the age of transformation or still at a transformation? I think we are still very much at age of transformation. In terms of role of technology in language assessments, we have seen the technology being used in different roles. For example, supportive roles, assistive roles, or recently as a detective. And technology can be used to validate research assessment instruments. Vahid did a wonderful presentation the other day on the 4 different kinds of new tools we might be able to use. But one of them is eye tracking, for example. How do we integrate the eye movement data into, so I've got a bit of disruption at home at the moment, sorry for that, to validate research and assessment instruments, okay? But in the paper in 2017, also published in Language Assessment, I argued that how we can use technology and incorporate technology as an integral part of the construct of language assessment. So for the purpose of integrate language assessment, the argument would be, to what extent can we build technology into integrated language assessment tasks? So as I said earlier, we have seen the different roles of technology, different terms used, but I would argue the use of a new term, possibly computer integrated language assessment. It's a bit sort of a word mouthful, but it will be computer integrated language assessment. Now, I don't think we have the time to go into details about, why computer technology is important and so on, what we need to do. But I think the essence here is in Dan Douglas' quote here is, we must define the language construct to include appropriate technology in light of the targeted situation and test purpose, rather than driven by technology. So Milanovic also argued that we must try to make and take advantage of the benefits of technology has to offer without technology tail wagging the learning and assessment dog. So the use of technology for its own sake can lead to the trivializing of the language test tasks by limiting what we can include in our tests to those things that can be delivered easily by computers or the internet, or that can be scored by machines. So the argument here is we want to be in the driver's seat to drive the change in the future and to see how technology be an integral part of the integrated assessment. And obviously the reconceptualization of computer integrated language testing will facilitate and promote innovations in test design, especially in task formats and assessment criteria. So the multimodality of integrated assessment, I would think, there's a great scope of integrating different sources, audio, visual, animation, virtual reality, you name it. But apparently, currently, we are still at very much a transmission period. There's no radical transformation yet. And the concept of integrated assessment or computer integrated language assessment is still kind of a progressively evolving construct rather than a significant change in our operation of language tests. In this point, I would also like to acknowledge the support and the collaborations of various people, as you can see here, Pauline Reed-Dickens, Richard Kiley, Lian Zhenhe from Zhejiang University, Tali Isaac, and Su Wen, Liu Sa, Mikako, Yang Li Fan, Tony Clark, and Xinhua Zhu from Hong Kong PolyU. We have worked together on with a shared interest on integrated assessment quite productively. And I hope that the research on integrated assessment will expand, but will expand in a more systematic manner. Thank you very much. I think my time is out.
Very well timed, I have to say. It's not easy to time a 45-minute presentation. Thanks, Guoxing. That was great. Excellent. Okay, everybody, we've got our panel discussion coming up in 10 minutes. So please, please be around for that. I mean, it's a final session. It's not something you'd want to miss. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll just leave this room open. The panelists will be in this room. And yeah, if you want to take a short break, yeah, you'll have about 10 minutes to do that. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks Guoxing. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.